Well, good evening and welcome to the evening broadcast of the Church Safety Guys. I am James and I'm joined once again by the dancing Paul Buckner and the extremely disciplined Mike Scully. These guys crack me up. Honestly, yeah.
Hey, we missed a week, so
We did
we've
miss
had
a
extra
week.
time, so.
It feels like it's been longer than that for some reason. It's not that we don't ever talk on social media multiple times a day or anything like that. But
well, the exciting thing for our guests is since we missed last week, we have a full 2-hour broadcast tonight. So
I think my stomach's going to disagree with you.
Dinner.
Right. So if you just joined us, we're going to talk about how to deal with stress at church, and we're going to play a recording that we did with John Riley of his ministry and Gentle Response up in Michigan, and he does a lot of de-escalation training. And the last time we had him on, there was just it felt like so much that we were trying to unpack in that hour. And so Mike and I kind of hooked up with him later and said, hey, can you expound a little bit on this? So I just want to throw out there, if you haven't seen the de-escalation previous video, take some time and go back, and because there's some awesome gold, as Paul calls them, gold nuggets in there. And, and this kind of follows up behind that. So definitely, we love you guys hanging out with us tonight, and you definitely want to listen to this message as well as the last one. It seems like stress is something we all deal with, and as we're getting through the COVID and different aspects of that, we're seeing more and more people come into the church that have concerns and baggage, right? Everybody's got that. So being able to de-escalate and defuse a situation, sometimes with a kind word or even just a smile, is beneficial. And I love John. John's an expert in that. He's been a great supporter of the Church Safety Guys in our ministry. And I'm appreciative of that friendship that we have developed thanks to Simon with Worship Security Association. So give Simon that credit. So if you are joining us, feel free to throw comments, questions out there, and then also if you would list where your church is, where you're listening from, and we'll go from there. But a couple exciting things real quick before we get rolling on that. We have this week, actually today, Amazon released the newest copy of To Protect and Serve. So that's available for purchase on Amazon right now. And for some reason it wasn't releasing, and there was some technical glitchy issue. And then I called them and talked to them, and they were like, oh, we're sorry. It's not you. It's not your content. It's just, glitchy on our end. So they fixed it. And so now it's out there and it's available. And we also have a fundraiser going on for that. We have connected with numerous law enforcement agencies around the U.S. And we've had chaplains and other ministry workers contact us, churches contact us and say, hey, can we get some copies of this for the sake of passing out to law enforcement and that sort of thing. So I'm going to play a quick video of just explaining that promotion and talk about that for a second, and then we'll jump back in with you. All right, so that was real quick. So I'm going to pull the picture back up. I would, except I don't have it downloaded. Oh, I'm going to shoot myself. I apologize for that. So basically what it is when you purchase one, we are directly selling and shipping the books. So if you purchase one through the fundraiser Facebook that we're doing, and send us your address if you want a copy, then we're going to go ahead and ship you a copy. And then we're also, for every one copy you buy, we are donating a copy, or that helps pay for another police department to get a copy. So it's a little bit more expensive, just being honest, because we're basically kind of analyzing and working with margins in Amazon to try and reduce the cost so that we can turn around and give another copy to law enforcement. But I'll tell you, in 24 hours, we've been crazy, extremely blessed. People have come out of the woodwork to donate just because of wanting to support law enforcement and give them an encouraging boost. So it's been encouraging to me, because, you know, when we talked about this, and you guys know where I'm coming from, but I never thought that God would really use it to this extent already. I just thought, hey, you know, it's going to be another great book, and no qualms, no issues with that. And now, you know, I had somebody come up to me at church today and say, hey, I've been reading your books and I really appreciate it. And, you know, that person, I hardly knew them. That person turned around and donated to provide some to law enforcement. So
That's great.
Paul, were you going to?
Yeah, I was going to follow that. Doing chaplain work with law enforcement, like we did a dinner last night for a gentleman who's retiring. He's not retirement age, but life and health and family. He's retiring from law enforcement full time. And he's going into another line of work. And we did a barbecue and surprised him last night. And so many times when you leave the military, and our veterans in the group can acknowledge this, you feel disconnected from that sense of community. And the same thing is true when you leave law enforcement, or there's times, like there's been times in our American military history that maybe veterans weren't welcomed home. I think of Vietnam, and they
Sure.
didn't feel welcome in their own town or whatever. And I have an uncle that it still haunts him to this day, because a couple of goobers in an airport in San Francisco, I believe it was, might have been San Diego, treated him very poorly, and it haunts him my entire lifetime later. Our law enforcement is going through that right now, and that is something that it is a tangible way. I know a lot of people are very frustrated, and they feel like, hey, how do I say thank you? I don't even know what to say. I don't know how to approach. This is a neat way to give back into law enforcement, and maybe there's somebody you know. And then some of these stories are going to be stories that bless you, because if you've never lived some of the things that James talks about, it's really hard to know. You know, I mean, I was at a wreck the other day helping, and you got this clenched feeling in your gut. You're directing traffic. I almost got in a fight with an SUV that wouldn't obey the signals that were being given. It's not, you know, being funny, but it's not what people think it is. And so I think this is an excellent opportunity that it gives back into law enforcement, and it's something that we can take those proceeds and bless churches with them. So anyway, I see it as a huge win.
Yeah, what was awesome to me is I reached out to some of the folks that we've established relationships and partnerships with on, you know, church safety guys, and you know, everyone, a good chunk of people that we've had on our show that are really church safety professionals have contributed to it. So I look at it, you know, yes, I did write the first section, first part of it, but in reality, you know, we have a section in the book where so many people have contributed, and it really is an honor to me that, you know, I mean, we probably have 150 years, no joke, of law enforcement experience that have written stories and contributed to try and encourage the folks that are currently there. You know, we've had, just to throw out there, Tina Lewis Rowe, she wrote, John Riley, he did the forward for me, and he wrote a story. Simon Azamo wrote, and You guys. Another friend, Scott Ryan, leads a smaller safety group up in Wisconsin, and I met him at the Wisconsin church conference that I went to. He contributed. Jim Howard, Matt Combs. So all names that that we've talked about. If we haven't had them on the show, we've talked about them, and it was kind of a cool collaboration that folks kind of stepped in and said, look, I want to do this, and I feel like I want to encourage people. So good stuff. So if you just joined us, welcome. We're going to talk about tonight. We're going to play a clip with John Riley of Gentle Response, and we're going to talk about stress and dealing with stress in the church and de-escalation. And one other thing I want to play real quick of something that we're going to be starting in August. We're actually going to be doing a 2 to 3 minute devotional on the road less traveled. And basically this is a daily snippet of what, as you work through the book daily, if you're on the road or you want to listen to it and you don't have the time, this kind of gives you the opportunity to follow through and stay current with that. So I've got a quick video on that, and then we'll jump into the evening here. All right. So if you've just joined us, thanks for hanging out with us and welcome back. That was just a quick video starting August 1st in the Road Less Traveled, on the Road Less Traveled book page. We're going to be releasing some little snippets daily of just working through that book and basically giving you the opportunity to listen to the lesson and the daily devotion instead of just reading it if you're on the road or something. And I think eventually I'd like to say that we're going to get through all of that. We have a group study component in the most recent book, To Protect and Serve. There is a group study component in the back of that, but I haven't put together the PowerPoint or that aspect of it for small groups. So still a lot of stuff going on. Feels like a lot of plates in the air at the same time, but we're definitely working on stuff, and we certainly couldn't do it without your support. So we appreciate all of you listening, watching, being partners with us, and supporting our being involved in supporting our ministry. So without further eloquence, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here, and that's my word of the day: eloquence.
Sesame Street was brought to you by Eloquence. The letters 1, 4, and 5.
Word score.
Wait a second. You just said the letters 1, 4, and 5. What?
Na 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 na. Anyway, let's launch this thing.
He missed Sesame Street, Mike. His letters aren't numbers. The last time I checked, I don't know.
We're done. They'll spell the color purple. It's okay.
They'll block our audio for having copyrighted work. Careful.
Probably, right? YouTube will pull our stream.
Did manages to trip their copyright filters. That's impressive.
All right, so we're going to jump in here to a previous recording with Mike Scully and I and John Riley.
When I first started out, again, based on my own experiences, I knew I had to keep it simple and memorable. And a lot of people tend to remember simple acronyms. I knew that everything hinged and everything hinges on your initial presentation of yourself, your appearance. And that's how I came up with that. I knew that it had a lot to do with your appearance, body posture, facial expression, your nonverbal messages, and so on. So I came up with the A, appearance. And then the next thing, your tone, because right after that, in sequence, you have that initial contact visually, and now you have that verbal contact. Now your tone of voice, the words you use, the words you say come into play. C, communication. And then your engagement after those initial greetings and that initial contact, now you're into that interaction phase where now you've got to be engaged. You've got to show empathy and compassion. You've got to connect with the individual that you're dealing with. And that's your engagement, active reflective listening. And that's how that came about. And that's where I also emphasize with a lot of people, it's not just a cop thing where we're looking at people's hands and we're looking for bulges around their waistline for some type of weapon. You're picking up other people's body language. We do it automatically. When we're at the store, we pick up people's languages, and I try to remind people they're picking up yours too. And so I tell young officers and church security and all that, when you approach someone, start with a smile. Your smile is probably the most effective de-escalating tool you have. Scientific studies have shown that just the mere act of smiling releases all of these feel-good chemicals, melatonin, dopamine, endorphins, and all that. That's also designed to help you stay calm in a stressful situation. You've heard of nervous laughter. That's a body's automatic reaction. And as a matter of fact, we did a training. One of the first times I observed this phenomenon in a training situation, a gentleman walked into one of my scenarios with one of my female role players, and in moments, he has the giggle fits. And, it's funny, but after a while, it stopped being funny. It's like, okay, because here's the thing. A lot of people will come out of that. And in the 4 years since we've done that, other people that have ended up having the giggle fits, they'll say, well, you know what? I wouldn't do that in real life. I wouldn't do that in real life. I hope you don't. It's just that I know from experience, there's such a connection between what you do in training and what you do in real life. And if you find yourself and you don't control yourself laughing and giggling in a simulated stressful environment, you may be inadvertently conditioning yourself to laugh and giggle when you're in the real thing. And so I obviously, hey, okay, I hope you don't in real life, and I hope they don't. It's just that's a real tricky situation there. And so I tell people at the beginning of our scenarios and all that, look, you may find yourself laughing and giggling. Fight it. And everyone goes through a certain amount of that at some point. And so again, but the smile, one of your most powerful de-escalating tools. However, just like any tool, if you use it improperly, you mistime it, you smile inappropriately at an inappropriate moment, you could look like you're sneering or leering or whatever, and it could just blow up in your face. So you've got to gauge when you smile. But however, again, that's a good start. When you're walking up to someone, whether you're an usher, greeter, and we'll keep this church related, usher, greeter, church security, start with a smile. Hey, good morning. Welcome to church. I just noticed that you struggling with that nap backpack there. May I take a look at it? We have a policy. That's another big issue, backpack policies now. But start with a smile. I think I relayed to you the story last time I was on, where the gentleman, the parking lot attendant, just tone of voice and attitude heavy-handedly told my friend, look, you can't park there. But if he had smiled and said, hey, good morning, buddy, you can't park right there, but if you follow me, I'll help you find a parking spot. Friendly greeting, but none of this, hey, you can't
Disarming.
park. Yep. Exactly.
Disarming right from the beginning. Yep.
And see, here's the thing. A lot of people don't realize. Did the parking lot really do anything wrong? No, he did his job. He told the guy he can't park there. But did he really do it right? Was he friendly? Was he outgoing? Did he welcome him that Sunday morning to church? Did he offer to help like we want our people to do in the first place? Like I said, I've just seen so many good people just don't realize that they're approaching people wrong, or they're reacting and responding inappropriately to someone who becomes loud and rude. So that's basically the appearance aspect of it. It's critical. You could escalate a situation before, and I said that I think last Sunday. You can escalate a situation just on appearance alone before a single word is spoken, because all they have to do is look at your facial expression. Do you look friendly? And there's actually, do you look friendly? And actually, here's something that I emphasize in classes. I strongly believe that the primal human animal deep down inside is constantly looking at the world around it and wondering, does it look like a threat? Does it sound like a threat? And if you keep that in mind, that will work with young, old, male, female, stone, crazy, high. As long as you do not present yourself as a threat to them and you don't sound like a threat, you don't look like a threat, they're most likely going to remain even keeled. But you see, your appearance, your communication, engagement, it all works together. You can't have a smile on your face and then have a snotty tone of voice. You know what I'm saying? It has to come together.
Sure.
There's a YouTube on video. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so if I cross my arms and stand there like this, like I'm a security guard, or stand there with my hands on my holster and
your hip, right,
flashlight.
Well, you know what? I gave this demonstration in class. Even as a police officer, even if I had my hand on, I'm right-handed, even if I had my hand on my gun, if I point at you and say, you know what, Jim, I need you to stop what you're doing. Okay, this is very, very aggressive. But if I do this, all right, Jim, I just need you to stop what you're doing. This whole, even though I still have my hand on my gun, this whole thing right here can change the whole context of how you view how I'm coming to you. And I could say the exact same words. Jim, I need you to stop what you're doing. Jim, I need you to stop what you're doing. Your reception of all this is very different. And it's that simple.
I've been in a few situations, but I teach, I don't know, for the last 12 or 13 years, I've taught firearm classes and awareness classes like with the NRA and that sort of thing. And I was in a situation, actually, one time I was driving down to Kentucky and I stopped at a rest stop and went inside real quick. As I was going in, I held open the door for the gentleman that was riding with me. And so he goes to walk past me into the vestibule. And I'm standing there with the door open and I go to walk in behind him. And out of nowhere, this guy that had been pacing back and forth, he was about 6'3", 6'4". He was pacing back and forth in front of the rest stop. And he was African-American, had his shirt off, his shirt was wrapped around his head because it was a warm day. Pants were down his thighs with, boxers hanging out, the whole 9 yards. So as I'm holding the door open, and something to me just didn't seem right because of how he was acting. I mean, he wasn't pacing, waiting for someone. He was pacing like he was mad. Like very, very agitated pacing. So as soon as I opened the door, my friend walked in, this gentleman, makes a straight beeline for me. And as I'm bringing my head up to walk into, the vestibule and the rest stop, I look down and his shoe is actually touching my shoe. So at that point, he is literally in my space. I didn't even have enough room at that point and I was carrying, I didn't have enough room at that point to even get a smooth draw because he was so close. And so I had the door in one hand, I let go of the door and I stepped back. And when I stepped back, I stepped into, and again, this is muscle memory because I don't remember intentionally thinking that, but I stepped back into a weaver position. And instinctively my hand went back to where my holster was because right away, he's in my space. I stepped back, my hand, I'm right-handed too. So my hand went back and I've got my hand there and I looked at him and he's like, hey, mister, do you have some money? Can I have some money? And when I stepped back and my hand went down, I looked him in the eye and I said, I don't have any money for you. And so as soon as that happened, and this whole thing happened within 5 or 6 seconds. I mean, that's how quick, quick it was. As soon as I brought my hand back and I stepped back, it gave me the 3 feet of clearance. He put both hands up, up in the air like this. And he's like, I'm sorry, mister. I'm sorry. I won't bother you. And I just looked at him and I said, I left my hand there and I said, I don't have any money for you. And he's like, okay, I'm sorry. Wow. And he turns around and walks away. And, you know, I use that a lot of times. I use that as an example, you know, coaching people, like when you're carrying and, you know, space and personal distance and that sort of thing. But I'll never forget that, because the whole thing happened so quick. And, you know, I walked away, and for me, it was a learning experience, because I should have known better. To me, like when I start thinking about, you know, thinking back about how I could have done things differently, the thought that pops into my head is, how did you let him, or why did you let him get that close to begin with? You know, and you should have been more aware to bridge that distance, because in the back of your mind, you had questions based on how he was acting and his behavior and his body language. And so I beat myself up for that quite a bit. But, you know, fortunately, nothing came of it. And, you know, we called, as we got back on the road, we were actually caravanning. I walked into the men's room, and I'm thinking, okay, you know, if he follows me in here, what's the next step? You know, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to handle this? And when I walked in, there were actually 3 deputies. I didn't realize at the time that worked for me, that we were all caravanning together. They had stopped before us. And so there were 3 deputies in the restroom, and 2 of them were like, you know, linebackers that big.
Big
So
boys.
they come out of the, you know, they come out of the stalls, and they're like, "Hey, James, what's going on? You know, do you need help with something?" And I'm like wiping my face out, you know, because I'm sweating at this point. I'm moving down from the adrenaline high. But yeah, I mean, it always amazes me that it was very quick. And I just say that because, you know, the idea of, like what you mentioned, the idea of watching somebody's body language, if you really watch that, you know, you learn so much, even going to a mall and just sitting there and watching people walk by and how they handle themselves and what they do and that sort of thing. It's a big deal.
You could train your eye to pick up the cues. In other words, that sort of setting, you could start to see the follow through that occurs with different people. And now you start to identify patterns, and over time you get better at it.
And that's exactly right. And that's why most police officers are able to do it instinctively without even thinking about it. And if you can actually develop that same ability just by doing exactly that, the next time you're at the mall or the next time you're out shopping, just make a point of studying people. And after a while, it will just happen. You'll start picking up on their gait, the expression, their tone of voice. It just starts to come to you. Back to you, Jim. That story that you just shared, it seems like the only part there that you could have done differently is really just have your head on the swivel. And you said that you initially picked up his nervous or agitated pacing, but then at some point your head was down because all of a sudden he was in your space. Or did you actually see him approach you?
Well, when I had the door open, I was looking down and getting ready to walk in.
Okay, I see. Yep.
So, and you know, it's funny because the guy that was riding with me was a librarian, and I kind of laughed because as we got out of the car, he called attention to this guy walking back and forth. And he commented to me and he said, you know, that just doesn't really look right. I mean, he looks agitated. He looks like he's going to try and do something. And, you know, that was the first alarm bell that I should have paid attention to, because this gentleman that I was with, great guy, great friend of mine, but he's not always the best when it comes to awareness, you know? So the fact that he picked it up at that point for me was like, okay, you know, something's out of place here. And, you know, he and the guy, before he backed off, he had commented at one point and said he needed money for gas, and, you know, his car ran out of gas. And I'm thinking, you know, afterwards, as I'm trying to come down from that adrenaline high, I'm thinking, you know, there's no gas at a rest stop. It's just a rest stop off the interstate in Kentucky, you know, but and I mean, who knows what he was doing or what his intent was. They don't have gas at a gas
stop in Kentucky? They don't have gas at a rest stop in Kentucky?
No. This was one of those rests, like a state
park rest stop type
okay.
plate, you know, just to pull off, not an actual gas station pull off or anything like that. So
I'm familiar with anyway. You know, that's you actually bring up a good point. I don't want you to beat yourself up too bad, because I'm telling you from experience, things happen fast, and you can't spend too much time beating yourself on stuff, other than to just remember to keep your head up. And even if you had your head up and saw him approaching you, this is where you would really be reading him. Okay, is he approaching me as a threat? Or is he just another homeless guy looking for 25 cents to buy coffee? I've heard a lot of people, especially even in my church group, talk about what they would do. They watch other videos that they hear similar stories such as yours, and they say, well, I would not have let him get up in my space like that. Okay. That's good, because I teach my people, and my class is what we call the reactionary gap, right? A little distance, no closer than arm's distance, because you need that reactionary gap. Distance will give you time, and time will give you options. But what does that actually look like to you when you say you will not let someone get in your space? Just like that one person I spoke about last Sunday said that, well, I would show this person the love of Christ. Okay, what does that actually look like in a stressful encounter? So I would ask you, in your mind right now, being able to think about it, what would you do if you suddenly looked up and saw a 6'3" individual striding up to you in a purposeful manner? How would you maintain that reactionary gap?
Well, I mean, you know, I had the door open. I was fortunate that letting go of the door was enough that I could step back, you know, and again, you know, that's how when I shoot, that's how I practice a lot of times. And when I draw is the Weaver type stance. So realistically, I mean, I don't have a problem with telling somebody directly, you know, whether it's putting up my hand or saying, you know, okay, that's far enough, you know, you're good. You know, in a church environment, I'm probably more relaxed about that, because you know, it's a more calm, you know, environment. But, you know, I had another situation after that one where I was done. We were done with a church service on a Sunday night, and I went to get gas at a local gas station. And, you know, as I'm pumping gas, and I have a sports coat on, and I'm carrying and that sort of thing, but I'm filling my car up. This other truck comes flying into the gas station, parks diagonally across the lane, and the guy jumps out and then walks around so that he's facing me about probably about 10 feet away. And he starts in this whole story about, hey, my truck broke down and I'm trying to help my buddy and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I didn't say anything, and I'm pumping gas, and I'm watching him. He knows I'm paying attention to his story. He stopped talking and took one giant step forward. And at that point, he stepped forward, and it was like, well, wait a second, you know, what's separating us now is the gas, you know, the gas line going to the car. And so I looked at him, and without skipping a beat, you know, I swept my coat back. And again, I had my gun there, and I said, you know, I looked at him square in the eye, and I said, I don't have any money for you. And he's like, he never once made eye contact with me. He looked down at my holster and saw where my hand was, and then backed up, and he said, you know, I wasn't going to ask you for money anyway. And then goes and gets in his car and takes off driving. And I'm like, what in the world?
Well, yeah, that was very bizarre.
So, it's almost a surprise smash and grab style. Yes. In other words, it's that shock and awe of they surprise you with the quick arrival, they surprise you with the quick advance, and I think maybe some may get flustered and say, yeah, here's some money just to get them away, because that's their option. They're not carrying, they don't have the stance, the ability to kind of square off if necessary. So it can be tough.
You know, Mike, you make a good point that it probably was supposed to be a quick smash and grab type thing. Just shock him into the arrival, and all that.
Sure.
So,
and that's, I mean, to me, that's why, I mean, I try and pay attention, and I look at things like that. Just because I've been through a lot of training, and I'm comfortable with it. But at that particular point, like I said, I mean, I would probably be more relaxed in a church setting because the people that come up to me and talk to me, I know. That being said, we've gone shopping at the mall before, and my wife will be shopping with our kids, and to me, certain places that we go, one of the local malls closed down, but before they closed down, it was really bad, like gangs and stuff like that. And officers, when they responded to situations, there was a couple shootings there. When officers responded to situations, they wouldn't go into the building without having 2 or 3 officers backing them up. And that sort of thing. And when that happened, I started saying, okay, that's fine if we want to go there, but we're not going to go to that mall without me going with you and me watching. And so it got to the point where it wasn't fun. It wasn't a fun family shopping experience because all I'm doing is standing there watching, how people interact. And I think the last time we went there, we were in Sears and we were shopping, and my wife said, can you take the kids? We're going to split up. Can you take the kids over and look at some different clothes? And I said, sure, that's fine. But I lowered my voice, but I said, I'll do that as soon as the guy that's following us stops following us.
yeah.
And she kind of looked at me, and I said, yeah, for the last 10 minutes, a Hispanic guy has been following us and staring at your purse the entire time. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, guess what? Game. And he ended up leaving and going and doing something else, which is fine. But I think, honestly, to come back to your question, John, I feel like, 3 feet in average distance, and some people might not exactly know what that is, but a comfortable distance to chat with somebody, I don't have a problem with that. But when I'm in the middle of talking to you and you step forward, I have no clue who you are, and your shoe is touching my shoe. Then all of a sudden, that's a little different. You're trying to intimidate me based on your actions. And so, my response, and it's funny to me because in different scenarios, because I always get the question with Ohio law, what's brandishing, and if I have my concealed carry permit, am I going to get in trouble for brandishing and touching the gun and all this? And realistically, with the brandishing laws, it protects you from something like that. But again, I usually tell people, look, if you're that uncomfortable with the person that it raises a red flag, then you should be on the phone with the police, calling the police and saying, look, I was considering drawing my firearm because, so you're being proactive rather than reactive after the fact. But, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing. And unfortunately, I've tried to, I don't know, and kind of ingrain that in my kids, like, when you go to a store, watch what's going on around you, pay attention to stuff. And, we've done Sunday school classes and stuff like that, where I think usually once a year I train with one of the pastors, and we train all of the Sunday school teachers. And I had a guy at work that's good friends of mine, and he goes to another church, but I asked him to come in and sit in the classroom. And I asked him, nobody knew who he was, but I asked him, when you come in, I want you wearing an overcoat, a thick dress overcoat and a backpack. And I want to see, I want you to bring in as much firepower as you can under that and see, and set up a scenario. And it was amazing to me watching how many people got uncomfortable because they saw him come in and they didn't know who he was. And, and then I called, in the middle of the presentation, I called him up and I said, okay, take your coat off, show him what's in the backpack, show him all of this stuff. And, I was impressed by the folks that did, but what was interesting is one of the Sunday school teachers, love her to death. She's been a Sunday school teacher forever. She said to me, she's like, so you mean when I'm at church, I have to watch people like I do when I'm at the grocery store? And I thought that was so fitting. And I'm like, I looked at her and I said, absolutely. It doesn't matter anymore, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But the reality is, in church situations and settings, unless you know that person, it's no different, because we have visitors that come in, and if you're not interacting with them and and going out of your way to be hospitable, that can open up a whole nother thing. But
you said 3 feet, James, and I think there's I don't know the technical term. There's an actual reference referred to how people engage, whether it's familial, whether it's somebody who's an acquaintance, whether it's somebody who is somebody you don't know. And John, to your point with the appearance, I've seen it as, where are their feet in relation to myself, not just their arms crossed or their body language with that piece. Where are their feet? Are they squared off to me, or are they still in a slightly open stance? Are they slightly canted away from me, if you will? And to me, that's how I help determine, as they turn, if they turn forward and face off, that's more of a kind of on guard dual position, which is kind of escalating that point. But to your point, James, I think you're right. In a church setting, it's easier to kind of let that down a little bit more, because we're more likely to know the people, more likely to feel like it's because of the environment. Maybe there's another E there for you, John, because the environment we're in caters to where we're at, and what to expect. But in a gas station you're not familiar with, you're walking in, caught off guard by somebody, that changes the potential reaction.
You can get a false sense of complacency because of your environment. Exactly right. I think automatically we don't want to think anything like that's going to happen at our church, of all places. We don't want to think that anyone that we know would be capable of beating their wife or their kids or anything like that. But the reality, unfortunately, is that stuff like that does happen. One of the things that can potentially happen with people, again, you're talking about squared off and all that. That is exactly why I tell folks, again, it goes back to your appearance. When you're approaching someone, just be very well aware how you're approaching them, because if you are inadvertently squaring off to them and they're already upset, just like that incident I had described to you. If I came around with my arms crossed or I squared off on him, that person can perceive that as an act of aggression. And among guys, having our arms crossed, it's a very normal, natural posture to take. But the difference is the context and the moment that you're in when you assume that position. Because if I'm angry about something, I'm a customer, I call Mike up, I go to the store or whatever, and I'm upset, and he assumes this position like this, I'm immediately going to get that much more upset, because now he looks defensive, he looks closed off to me, blah, blah, blah. But if we go there and he starts off with a smile and we talk, and after a moment he goes like this, that initial contact has been established. I know he's listening to me. He's already showed that he cares what my problem is. That doesn't become that big a deal unless he changes his tone of voice. And now it sounds like he's getting upset with me. Now that could spiral out of control. It's those initial moments and little things like that. You're squared off on somebody or your body posture that is so critical. And that's a good one about the feet. I had actually forgotten about that. I had heard about that as an indicator also. But that's very true. If the toes and the feet are pointed at you, that's squared off. That's exactly right.
One of the things that I do on a regular basis is, we have two services for our church. One is usually like a Sunday school, and then we have the worship hour or the preaching hour. And one of the things that I typically do is between those services, when there's a break, when people come in, a lot of times I will go into the sanctuary. And what I've noticed, our pastors will walk up and down the aisles and say hello to people and shake hands and make eye contact and talk to people. And one of the things that I've started doing that I do is I'll walk to the front of the church and I kind of stand there for a second and just watch and see, who's coming in with what, their reaction, and that goes back to, last week when I was telling you, somebody came up to me and they were like, "Hey, don't frown. Are you mad at somebody all the time?" And I had to correct myself. But then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll shake hands and I'll stop as well. And I'll stop and talk to people. And then if there's an individual that catches my attention, maybe they're a first time visitor, or maybe something is, a little bit off, with their personality or how they're acting, then I'll go to them as like, okay, I talked to this person, next person. Oh, hey, how are you? I haven't seen you before. My name's Jim and welcome to Fellowship Baptist Church. And so that interaction, a lot of times, because I'm already saying hello to other people, gives me and they see that gives me a gateway to step in and, and chat with them as well. And I think, honestly, I mean, we've had, I forget his name, but there's definitely been a push towards lowering. I don't know what the statistics are, but I know that the shooting that happened in Charleston, the church shooting on I think it was a Wednesday night, when the guy came in, one of the first things that he said was, if somebody had stopped and greeted me and made me feel welcome, then I probably wouldn't have pulled my gun and shot up the church. And I mean, that whole scenario, that's a whole nother thing, because there's just a lot that happened there that probably shouldn't have. But going back to that, okay, if we catch the idea and the mentality, if we catch everybody, even if we don't recognize them, and we put forward the effort to actually be friendly and engaging and hospitable ahead of time, then, we're setting ourselves up for a win instead of reacting to everything that's going on.
The challenge there I've found, and I'll share an experience that I was part of at my church that I witnessed, and this young people, especially church security, they don't have that much life experience in being awake and aware of other people's body language and suspicious characters. And they pick up on something that catches their attention, and then they spend an inordinate amount of time. They create their own tunnel vision because this person caught my attention initially, but there has to be a continuum of events and indicators. I'll give you an example. This happened about 2 years ago. I was waiting. It was in between services. I was waiting for my wife and daughter to join me with the second service. I was on an elevated area on the second floor, looking down at one of the main entrances, people coming and going, and I'm Facebooking and waiting for my wife to come. And one of our security people comes by, starts chatting with me, and then this person says, "Well, I'm keeping an eye on that guy over there." And I look up. Around the banister from me was another individual, also leaning on the banister, looking at his phone and looking at the crowd. And in moments, nothing about him justified any further concern. But I gave the security guy the benefit of the doubt, because I don't know what he did earlier. So I said, "Well, what did he do?" And the security person said, "Well, don't you think that if he's just standing there, don't you think that if he was waiting for someone, they would have come here? They would have arrived by now?" And I looked at this person and I said, "Well, I'm still standing here waiting for my wife," And so a few moments later, my wife arrived, and sure enough, a few moments later, his family arrived. And that really stuck in me because, again, the security person, meaning well, trying to do a good job, be alert, stay alive, head on a swivel, but you can suddenly become fixated on someone who's suspicious and not recognize that, okay, they may have done or said something, and it's always hard to put a finger on it. They just caught your attention. But if there is not a continuum of other indicators, let it go. Because I started thinking, well, what if a real bad guy had just walked right by us while she's, this person's focused on that person? It just highlighted the need for just more experience, more, and not necessarily training. You're supposed to be keeping an eye out for people. The trick is to recognize, okay, does that warrant continued observation, or it's nothing, and just move on. And that comes from experience. I know
All right. If you just joined us, we're playing a previous recorded session with John Riley, and we're kind of wrapping up some of the discussion that we had about, I think it was about a month ago, on de-escalation, and talking to him and just bringing in some extra points. We don't have time, despite what Paul said earlier. We're not going 2 hours tonight. So we don't have time to play the whole recording. We will have to catch it on another day, the wrap up. But what's interesting to me is every time I listen to one of the recordings of a guest that we have on that we talk to, I get something else out of out of that recording. And so one of the things that kind of popped out to me, and then I'll throw it to you guys and see if you have anything to add, was the distance. We talked a lot about that, about making sure that when you communicate with someone, you're an appropriate distance. And I think a lot of times with church, we negate that. Like, we overlook it because we know, like Mike said on the recording, we know people better at church. So we want to think that naturally that person's not going to do anything. And sometimes that can get us into trouble, because the same person that we would say, oh, they would never, like what John said in the beginning, they would never do something like hurt their family or assault their family, is the same person that we're thinking in our minds, oh, it's not a big deal because, this person, they would never do something like that. Well, maybe they're having a bad day, or maybe they're coming to the church and they're recognized, but their intentions aren't, good intentions, like Sutherland Springs or another one of those. So I definitely think that's something to consider. And I love, it's very challenging. Tonight I was at church and for a little bit, and one of my friends had his son, and his son was, I think he's under a year old, and he dropped something and he was kind of making some funny noises, and I started laughing, and I realized, I had a mask on, and I made eye contact with the dad, and the dad knew that I was kind of laughing, but at the same time, having a mask just kind of throws a whole nother, thing in there, because you can't see somebody's facial expressions about I mean, just having the ability to chuckle or laugh over something or smile is really, to de-escalate or engage with that person, it's challenging today. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
I have not got to see this, and so I grabbed a notebook and I put the general response logo on there. So John, if you're watching tonight, I threw that up there, and I do that a lot for classes I go to. And right now, with this whole COVID nightmare going on, I am drinking in any education I can. And so I've started a general response notebook, and one of these days I'll get to use it in person with him. But I was taking notes and thinking about, even just today, I was dealing with a guy today and then last Sunday, and I'm standing here talking to one of the pastors at our church, and I see this guy come in and he's a few minutes late. And that could be, it's not necessarily a red flag, but it has my attention. Well, he's wearing a jacket, and it's like, 85 degrees out, and he didn't come in and slip the jacket on, and I can see, because the jacket's moving, his waistband is free, so there's no weapons that are there. But he looks at me, and I would call it like a furtive glance. He's like, looks at me, and then he makes eye contact with me, and then he looks away, and then he takes some steps, and he looks at me again, and now I'm like, red flags are starting to rise, and I'm watching this guy, and I kind of, smile and wave, and he's not returning it, and he kind of looks again, and I'm like, the heck is going on here? And so I go over and talk to one of our other pastors, and I'm like, hey, do you know this guy? This is where he's sitting. I've stepped in and looked, and he's gone and sat down, and he's kind of got himself wedged with his back to the wall, and he's looking at the entire crowd, the way he's got himself wedged. And I'm like, well, that to me is a DLR. And I don't know the guy. I said, I've seen him one other time. So this is 2 times that I've seen him here. It just struck me as odd. And I said, I'm not saying that he's dangerous. I'm just saying, can you get eyes on him and let me know? And so he's like, I don't know him. One of the other pastors takes a step and he goes, oh, well, he's one of our guys. Yeah, I know who he is. He comes from time to time. And I'm like, oh, okay. You ever had any problems with him? He's like, no. I'm like, okay. And they had a guy in there that kept eyes on him. But when people do stuff like that, they throw up red flags. And I was doing my best to be friendly and to be personal and be like, hey, how's it going? Just nod at me. Just give me, and then watching people's body language. Last Sunday, we had a guy, he comes out, his face is flushed, his eyes are wide, he's got his hands over his mouth, and he's got this 1,000-yard stare. He's leaning forward slightly, almost like he could stumble. And I'm thinking medical condition. This guy is having a medical condition. And so I come up to him very quickly, and I turn to the deputy I was standing with, and I said, hey, I'm going to go make contact with this guy. And I'm like, hey, buddy, are you okay? He goes, I don't know. And so I get him over there, and we sit down. We start talking. He finds out that someone that he knows that's a friend of his just died under tragic circumstances. And he gets a text message while he's in church, probably from somebody who did not know he was in a service. And so I get a water bottle, and when I found out that his loved one had died, I look over, catch the eye of one of our pastors, do one of these. He comes over. I give him a 2-second synopsis because nobody wants to have to repeat that whole thing. And I said, hey, and introduced the two of them. And then I jumped up and got a bottle of water. And I love the bottle of water. If I beat anything to death, it's exercise, always train, and the water bottle, right? And so in front of him, I cracked the water bottle open. I hand it to him. And I told him, I said, believe it or not, this really will help you calm down. It's something that will help your body to calm down. And I said, it's just kind of magic how it works. And so he kind of takes a sip, sits there for a few seconds. You could tell he's reacting to it. We're watching his body language. He's sitting down and everything. I'm talking to him. We have an opportunity to pray with him. I think all of that comes back around. We're talking about stress in church. We're talking about de-escalation. John is the grand master of de-escalation. And I think all those skills are incredibly important. When someone's angry, if we can be calm and we can be collected and we can be nice and not take it personal, be able to kind of deflect that away. That's something that verbal judo, the gentleman that came up with verbal judo, talked about deflecting comments. Well, I can appreciate that, but I apologize. I can't let you park here. It's for handicapped only, so I'm sorry. Well, I understand that, but I still can't let you park here. Anyway, that's stuff that was going through my head.
I thought it was kind of interesting, and I apologize. I'm not sure what happened. I think we just lost Mike.
It was the rapture, and we missed it.
I guess. But real quick, until he comes back, Sunday, and Paul, you kind of know this story a little bit, but Saturday, I was asked to do an executive protection detail for some churches that were meeting in downtown Columbus. And so there was a lot of firsts in it for me. One of those was I went, because of the status of the situation, I went very heavily armed with a vest on, with a rifle, etc. And while I was standing watch for some of the activities that was going on, some people that happened to be walking by came up, and they were wanting to sit and listen. And there were several pastors that were preaching the gospel, and it was great. They did a fantastic job. And so as I'm standing there, people come walking up and they sit down, and I'm like, the first thing in my mind is, okay, what's this person's intention? Why are they stopping? Or is it, non-threatening? Or are they just listening? What's going to end up happening here? And so one of the things, and Mike will probably hear this later, but to call out to his point on the video, one of the things that I did was I looked at the person's feet when they sat down to see, and there was about 15 feet. I was standing off to the side. There was about 15 feet between them and the pastors or the preachers preaching. And I was off at an angle of about 5 feet from them. So I stood there, and and my first reaction is, okay, if they try and do something, I can jump in and I can get between them going to the pastors. So I still have that window of space and distance. But, with that, Mike's back, so I'll bring him back in here. But with all of that going on, that's my awareness. That's my, EP mindset. Okay, a van later pulled up with the side door open down the street, and it's like, wait a second, what's going on? People don't drive cars around with van doors open and all this stuff. But what I had to remind myself is, yes, even though we're watching, and this is kind of to one of John's points earlier, even though we're watching, even though someone might do something odd, that doesn't immediately eliminate them from or put them in a threat position. And so, these folks that had come up to sit down, really, they were hearing the gospel. And so for me at that point, it was like, you know what? They're not doing anything. They're sitting there. So I had to almost change my mindset to say, okay, it doesn't appear to be a threat like I originally thought. It was odd, but okay, I'm going to adjust this a little bit, and I'm not going to ask them to move or say anything, because these people need to hear the gospel because they're sitting here. And how do I know that, God didn't orchestrate them walking down the street at that particular time to hear that particular message? So I definitely think, with everything, and Mike, you're willing, you're free to chime in here too, because I haven't gotten to you yet. But I think that we just need to be careful and make sure that we're putting our best foot forward, but also, that we're being aware and applying those tools to make sure that we can handle each situation the best we can.
Couple thoughts there. I apologize, my internet went down for a second there. I picked up kind of through some of that is, I think in church, sometimes we have the tendency to immediately go to orient and decide that they're not a threat and not observe. And so we're skipping that OODA loop, and we're automatically assuming or disarming in our own mind, saying this person may or may not be a threat without really doing the observation step. And I think that was one piece that I think caught there earlier also is the fact that we got to make sure that we're always in touch with our own body language, that we are not ourselves becoming a trigger. I think by nature of that arms crossed, that stance where you might be standing in the church, we're there as protectors, as observers, as greeters, as ushers. We're not there as bouncers. We're not protecting the stage in some rock concert. So I think the difference is that if we have the body language that is open, if we are catching people as they're walking in and catching their eye with ours and acknowledging people or giving them a sign of, hey, we see you, welcome, respect, etc., you're going to be disarming just in that mutual respect of sharing back and forth. And then finally, the last thought was in the when you are kind of observing and orienting to a person, whether that be at the gas station there or in our church, is how often somebody who's there for the wrong reason, their story can fall apart after 3 layers of questioning. And so they may have prepared an answer to the first question, but if you probe and you push a little bit further, their story falls apart if they're there for the wrong reason. And so I think you can ultimately flush that out if you're prepared to interview the person, if you will, on the spot, and not just take their first answer as rote.
Yeah, it's a discussion for itself. I think we literally could do a live dramatization, and I play the weirdo because I'm good at that. But and you start asking funny questions like that. Oh, really? So you're from Maine? I got some friends up there. What part of Maine? And you start asking questions like that, and in a fun, a nice way, and all of a sudden you start discovering things. I mean, we've had people. I've sent guys out to the parking lot to send me pictures of the vehicle of the person that was there panhandling, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're from Oklahoma." That's weird because your plates say Arizona, and they start telling me these stories. Oh, really? How long you guys lived in Oklahoma? Oh, about 5 years. Where you live? Just outside of Tulsa. Really? That's interesting. And you start to, what do you guys do out there? And you start going down through that list of questions, and so I'll send a text back to my guy. hey, I apologize. I gotta tell this guy where to find something really quick. Shoot a text to him, and I'm like, so does it look like they're traveling? Yeah, there's pillows and all kinds of stuff all over the inside of it, and they're trying to tell me they're just over the border in Oklahoma or something. To your point, Mike, those are valuable questions, and sometimes I'll be in a conversation with somebody on a safety team, and as I'm standing there, I'm like, well, has anybody gone out and gotten eyes on their vehicle? And sometimes you get this blank look, and then sometimes somebody's like, yeah, we're good, and they turn it around and they show you a picture of the vehicle, a picture down into the vehicle, the license plate. And by the way, what would tie somebody to a crime if somebody did something really bad and stupid? They disturb your service, they try to hurt somebody, they do something offensive, they try to grab a kid and they flee. What ties them to the crime? Perhaps the license plate that you got in the parking lot.
Yeah, I honestly, I was just going to say the exact same thing, and you beat me to it, Paul. So, but to my point, one of the things that I do is, like, if someone comes in late, and as I take them to where the sanctuary is across the church, I'll walk with them and I'll talk to them, and I'll say the exact same thing that you just said. I'll say, hey, where are you guys from? Oh, really? And that's one of the cool things about, I guess, about having a family that's spread out all over the country, because if they're like, or friends, people that I know, because if they're like, hey, I'm from Texas, I'm like, oh, what part of Texas? Because I've got friends in Dallas, Austin, and so it's a great starting point, and it takes I think takes some of the edge off of like what John was saying earlier about telling somebody, well, you can't park there, and just dropping it. It's like, okay, it takes some of the edge off of grilling the person, but just having an open conversation. And, if the person doesn't raise any extra flags and they're not a threat, then it's great for you, because you just met somebody new and you made somebody feel more comfortable because, they're new to that, and that sort of thing. But Paul, you wanted to add something? And Mike, you want to add something?
Sure. I think one of this is through all this idea of de-escalation and the ability to interpret, to observe, to orient, to decide and act. I think this it tells something about how we need to be making sure that we're putting in process for our recruitment. Is that we need people that aren't just going to stand a post. We're not just looking for people that are rent-a-cops, if you will, that are there to guard the stage. We want them to be looking out. We want them to be observing. We want them to engage, to John's point, and interact with the people as they come in, because that's their opportunity. That's their opportunity to show that respect. So I think we need to make sure that we are looking at who we're putting in our teams and saying, all right, are they just skilled in one area? Are they singly yoked, if you will? Or does this person have kind of an ability to kind of engage with the public in a positive way, and then also be trained additional response? Because I think it's much easier to train somebody on tactics than it is to train somebody on human interaction.
That's a good point. We need that on a shirt somewhere.
It would go around the shirt like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
We can stop
I just mean the point of, it's easier to train somebody in tactics than personal interaction, because
write that down.
That's a gold nugget worth the cost of admission right there.
Because somebody says that.
It's true. I mean, I can't teach you to be graceful and kind to someone and show them the love of Christ.
Yeah, it takes you.
But I can take anybody out and teach them how to shoot a gun. And I can take anybody out and teach them how to do CPR or first aid or whatever needs to be done. So I need to.
Dan Blevins talks about starting with the heart of the person. That you start there, because what we typically do, and our church did this when we first started, was like, well, we got Bill and Bob and Jack, and they all like to shoot, and then John over here likes to hunt, so we're going to start a safety team based on these guys. And we don't have it. I mean, at this point, I'm being silly to a point on purpose, but that's not really a good way to start a safety team, and it can backfire in a hurry, because maybe one of the guys that we picked has no sheepdog, been there, done that, was like, Well, they drove in 50 miles an hour and jumped out of the car and started running towards the building. I just figured they were late. You missed the fact that the tags were expired by 4 years. They were looking behind them desperately to hide. And when we approached them to greet them, they freaked out. Yeah, they were trying to hide from the cops. Or then you've got the guys that their only setting is like a hammer, and they just look at everybody like, yeah, that 90-year-old lady she could have an IED on her. I just know it. Twitch, Grandma, twitch, and it's on. And, I'm being silly, but we've all met people that have no sheepdog or they're only a hammer. And then I wanted to circle back to something you had said, Mike, which you were talking about. You were talking about observing and speaking. And I got myself sidetracked for a second. So I'm going to go back to what James was talking about. You were talking about people in the parking lot with John. Maybe I'll remember, Mike, what you triggered in my brain. But we had a guy a few Sundays ago that was in our parking lot as one of the attendants, and he tries to tell people exactly where to park. Well, these are stubborn human beings who may have a different desire of a place to park, and they may not want you to tell them exactly where to park. So I do this thing where I'm like, and people start laughing, and they'll pick a spot. And I've literally had people look at this particular guy and drive right past where he was, which is closer to where they want to be, and go somewhere else and park because they're like, don't you tell me where to park? And it's funny. It's how you deliver something is so much more important than what you deliver, because I'll motion like this, and people will almost always pull in there. Delivery is so important. And, if we walk up and we've got a section closed off because family's there, instead of saying, you can't sit there, because I've had that happen. Okay, now it's really hard to de-escalate when you escalated. But if you turn around and you say, hey guys, I apologize, the family, this is reserved for the family, they'll be here in just a few minutes, is so much easier. And then if they go, well, I'm actually his aunt. Oh, we haven't met. My name is Paul. Well, I tell you what, if you want to go ahead and have a seat, and I apologize, instead of her going, I am family, I don't know who you are, it's so much easier to start with a friendly thing, and you can take it up a little or down a little than it is to start with a negative. And we've all met that person that's like, I'm in charge of parking. You're going to park where I want you to park.
Well, and one of the things that I do to that point often too is I kind of, I've been working through Chris Voss on
Art of Negotiation.
The Art of Negotiation with Masterclass. And I was on the road a couple of days ago, and I finished up his series, and I was listening to it. And if you haven't listened to any of the Verbal Judo or Chris Voss stuff, excellent material, and a lot of it's on YouTube. But one of the things that he mentions is ask the question why, or circle back around. And one of his comments is, and I kind of picked up on this, is it's not. I'm okay with making myself look like an idiot. If I say, oh, I'm sorry, you know what? I'm just not thinking today. I'm sorry to bother you. I put you in the wrong seat. Could I ask you then it's not putting it on them. It's bringing it back. It's putting it on you. And, I can live with a few minutes of joking around and trying to engage with that person or make it, or, crack a joke versus being serious. But as far as the evening goes, we really need to wrap up. We went a little bit over, but next week I will say, and I'm going to turn it over to Paul and have him close us in prayer tonight. Next week we do have Dan Blevins coming on from CV Ministries, and he does a fantastic podcast. Has been doing that for a long time, has been going around with Jimmy Meeks and the Sheepdogs. He toured with them for a bit, and I'm really looking forward to that. I know Paul's not at all. Paul could care. No, he's
every podcast that they've done. So when he toured with the Sheepdog Ministry, was he the bass guitarist or what?
Yeah, I think so. So.
Well, on that note, is there anything else we want to cover, or are we ready to wrap up?
I think we're good.
Good.
All right. Let's pray, guys. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for the opportunity with Christian brothers and sisters to talk and to pull out gold nuggets. Lord God, I was listening to John Leo Riley, and I always learn stuff from this guy. He is a master of his craft. And Lord God, our maybe the gun on our hip or the taser or whatever we're trained in our hands, they're good tools. But Lord God, our mouth is always a better tool. And I thank you for that. We win 100% of the fights that we don't fight. I ask that you would protect our churches, that you'd guide us through this week, Lord God, as we seek you and serve you. I ask that you'd give us the desires of our hearts. And I just lift up our church bodies as we go through a tough time with COVID and what to do and how to meet and where to meet and what to wear when we do it. Lord God, I just lift up our church body as a whole across this nation to you. In your son, Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So again, real quick, just want to thank Trinity Security Allies for being a partner with us and sponsoring, helping us sponsor our broadcast. John Riley with General Response. You can definitely check out their websites. And then also we'll do a quick shout out to Simon Azamo with Worship Security Association, because he has actually become a sponsor and has partnered with us for a while. But check out their websites. Simon has a remarkable collection of videos on, it really is the Netflix of church safety. I'm going to steal that line because somebody else copied it. So, but thanks for watching. Feel free to join us. Like I said, come back next week because we'll have Dan on. Really looking forward to that. And we hope that you have a great week and that you're blessed as well. So hang out. Thanks for hanging out with us. Check out our new book, To Protect and Serve, and the fundraiser that we're doing for that to bless law enforcement agencies all over the U.S. And that's actually now available on Amazon. So thanks for watching. Take care and God bless. Have a good night.